Ladies and gentlemen, in the world of global diplomacy, power often speaks louder than principles. But sometimes one nation's dignity can echo louder than all the mighty voices combined. When former U.S. President Donald Trump tried to corner India on the global stage, expecting compliance, submission, or silence, what he received instead were two voices that changed the narrative forever. Dr. S. Jaishankar, India's External Affairs Minister, and Sundar Pichai, the CEO of Google. Their replies did not just represent a country. They represented a confident, self-reliant, and forward-looking India, an India that no longer bows but leads. This is the story of how diplomacy, intellect, and innovation silenced arrogance and reminded the world that India is not to be underestimated. When Donald Trump stepped onto the global stage as President of the United States, he carried with him the aura of a dealmaker, someone who believed every nation had a price, every ally a leverage point, and every partnership a bargain. His approach to diplomacy was aggressive, transactional, and unapologetically American, first. But when he turned that same approach toward India, he encountered something entirely unexpected. A nation no longer willing to play by someone else's script. Trump's attempt to corner India began subtly through the language of trade. During his administration, he often accused India of being one of the world's tariff kings, claiming that American products faced unfair restrictions and taxes in the Indian market. In press conferences and public speeches, he openly challenged India's trade policies, suggesting that the U.S. was being taken advantage of. He wanted India to lower import duties, especially on American goods such as Harley-Davidson motorcycles, agricultural products, and medical devices. To Trump, it was a matter of dominance, a demonstration that even emerging powers like India had to adjust when the United States demanded it. But to India, this was a moment of truth, a test of sovereignty and national self-respect. Prime Minister Narendra Modi and his team, instead of rushing to appease Trump, stood firm. They made it clear that India's economic policies were designed not for the comfort of foreign corporations, but for the growth of Indian industries and workers. For the first time in decades, an Indian government refused to bend under Western economic pressure. The tension didn't stop there. Trump also tried to pull India into his geopolitical orbit by framing global alliances as binary choices. You're either with us or against us. He expected New Delhi to fully align with Washington on China, Iran, and defense procurement decisions. But India, guided by its policy of strategic autonomy, did not fall for the trap. Instead of blindly taking sides, it maintained its delicate balance, buying Russian defense equipment while strengthening defense ties with the U.S., maintaining energy trade with Iran while expanding cooperation with Israel and Saudi Arabia. This balancing act baffled Trump and his advisors. How could India maintain friendships across rival nations and still gain respect from all? The answer lay in something Trump's administration underestimated: India's quiet strength, its diplomacy, and its centuries-old wisdom of coexistence. Behind the scenes, high-level meetings were intense. American negotiators pushed hard on trade concessions, defense alignments, and digital regulation. They expected India to yield as many smaller nations had done under U.S. pressure. But the Indian diplomats, led by Dr. S. Jaishankar, calmly reminded them that India's decisions were sovereign, rooted in the interests of 1.4 billion people, not in the expectations of foreign powers. Trump, who prided himself on being unpredictable, met a nation that was immovable. He saw a country that listened respectfully but answered strategically. Even when Trump publicly joked about India's tariffs during rallies and interviews, India responded with patience, not provocation. It was a lesson in silent strength, diplomacy with dignity. And when Trump finally visited India in 2020, expecting a show of dominance, he instead witnessed something else entirely. The historic Anamas Trump event in Ahmedabad was attended by over 100,000 people, but it wasn't just a welcome ceremony, it was a statement. India showed hospitality without submission. It showed warmth without weakness. Through grand visuals and heartfelt gestures, India reminded the world that its friendships are built on mutual respect, not fear. Trump realized then that he was standing before a partner, not a subordinate. Not a subordinate. This shift in dynamics marked a turning point. The era when global leaders could pressure India with threats or deals was over. Trump's attempt to corner India on the global stage ended up proving that India was no longer a passive player in international politics. It had become a decisive power capable of shaping its own destiny. From that moment on, the tone of every global dialogue changed. World leaders began to speak to India differently, with respect, caution, and recognition of its rising influence. Trump had set out to test India's limits, but in doing so, he ended up revealing India's true strength to the world. When the global stage turned tense and Trump's administration began exerting public pressure on India, the world expected New Delhi to respond defensively. But India had a secret weapon, not one of missiles or machines, but of intellect and diplomacy. Dr. Subramaniam Jaishankar, a seasoned diplomat, former ambassador to both the United States and China, Jaishankar carried with him decades of experience, calm composure, and unmatched strategic clarity. He understood not just the language of diplomacy, but the psychology behind power. And when Trump tried to corner India through bold statements and unpredictable actions, Jaishankar responded not with emotion, but with precision, like a chess master moving his pieces with perfect calculation. When international media asked him about Trump's remarks on trade and global positioning, Jaishankar didn't get drawn into the drama. Instead, he looked straight into the camera and said with quiet confidence, "India's policies are not made to please any country. They are made to serve the interests of our people." That one line transformed the entire tone of the discussion. It was simple, but it carried the weight of India's 75-year journey of independence. A message to the world that India now operates from a position of self-respect, not submission. In meetings with U.S. officials, Jaishankar showcased a diplomatic style that was uniquely Indian. Firm yet polite, assertive yet measured. He didn't react to Trump's provocations. Instead, he redirected the conversation toward mutual respect and shared growth. He understood that real diplomacy isn't about domination. It's about negotiation. When the U.S. pushed India on buying the Russian S-400 defense systems, Jaishankar didn't apologize or evade. He explained that India's defense choices were driven by strategic necessity, not external approval. In one of his most memorable statements, he said, "We will do what is in our national interest, and others will have to understand that." That single sentence became a doctrine, a reflection of India's independent foreign policy. It told the world that New Delhi was no longer a pawn in the global power game. It was now a player in its own right. Jaishankar's mastery was not just in what he said, but in how he said it. His calm demeanor, his factual precision, and his unshakable confidence projected a new kind of Indian diplomacy, one that didn't need to shout to be heard. He spoke of partnerships instead of dependencies, of balance instead of bias. He reminded both allies and rivals that India's relationships are guided by principles, not pressure. In private diplomatic circles, foreign ministers and ambassadors began referring to him as the iron diplomat in a silk glove. His ability to disagree without offending and to assert without alienating became India's strongest tool on the world stage. Even American policymakers quietly began to respect him. They saw in Jaishankar not a reactionary minister, but a visionary strategist, someone who could engage with strength while maintaining grace. Under his guidance, India didn't just respond to Trump's assertiveness, it redefined its global image. When Jaishankar addressed international forums, he used those platforms to remind the world that global leadership is not about dominance, but responsibility. He emphasized that India stands for an order where respect is mutual and cooperation is based on equality. He made it clear that India's rise was not at the cost of anyone else. It was a contribution to global stability. That message resonated deeply, not only in Washington, but in capitals across Europe, Africa, and Asia. Through Jaishankar's diplomacy, India transformed a potentially confrontational relationship into a balanced dialogue. He didn't let Trump's words create hostility. He turned them into opportunities to showcase India's maturity. And that's what truly shocked the world, that India's response to power was not aggression, but intelligence. Not silence, but strategy. Jaishankar's composure under pressure sent a quiet but unmistakable message. India doesn't react, it responds. And when it does, the world listens. While the political arena was charged with statements and negotiations, another silent but equally powerful front was unfolding. The front of technology and innovation. Here stood Sundar Pichai, the Indian-born CEO of Google, representing not a government, but the face of India's global intellect. The face of India's global intellect. His words, actions, and leadership carried a different kind of diplomacy. The diplomacy of ideas, innovation, and human potential. When Trump and his administration began to criticize countries like India for benefiting from American technology while imposing local barriers, many expected global tech leaders to remain quiet, but Pichai's approach was different. Without raising his voice, without stepping into politics, he chose to speak through progress. Through the undeniable truth that India was not taking from the world, it was giving back tenfold through talent, creativity, and innovation. In interviews and global conferences, Pichai reminded audiences that some of the brightest engineers, scientists, and visionaries driving Google's global success came from India. The message was subtle yet profound. India was not just a consumer of technology. It was a creator, a driver, and a visionary power behind it. He highlighted how India's booming digital economy, its startup culture, and its young, ambitious population were not only transforming the Indian landscape, but also shaping global innovation. Every code written, every app developed, every idea born in India was part of the global technological revolution. Trump's argument that American companies were being taken advantage of collapsed in front of this reality, because the people who built these companies, who innovated their products, and who powered their systems were often Indian origin professionals. From Google and Microsoft to Adobe and IBM, the world's leading corporations were being led by minds that once studied in Indian classrooms. Sundar Pichai, Satya Nadella, Arvind Krishna, Shantanu Narayan, they all became symbols of a silent revolution that no trade war could stop. And when Pichai spoke about India, he did so not as a CEO, but as someone deeply connected to the country's vision for the future. He praised India's Digital India initiative, its expanding internet access, and its push toward inclusive technological growth. In doing so, he diplomatically countered Trump's rhetoric without confrontation, showing that India's rise in technology was not a threat to America, but an opportunity for partnership. Pichai's influence extended beyond business. His calm and visionary leadership reflected the best of Indian values: humility, intelligence, and global harmony. While politicians debated and nations competed, Pichai demonstrated that true power lies not in who controls the system, but in who builds it. His journey, from a middle-class boy in Chennai to the CEO of one of the world's largest technology companies, became a story that inspired millions and challenged the old narratives of global dominance. It was proof that in the 21st century, the most powerful nations would not be the ones with the largest armies, but those with the most brilliant minds. Through his leadership, Pichai also became a quiet ambassador for India's global identity. Every time he stood on a stage, every time he announced a partnership with India, or praised Indian developers and startups, it sent a message across continents that India's human capital is one of its greatest strengths. This was technological diplomacy at its finest. No podiums, no speeches of aggression, just innovation that spoke louder than any words could. Pichai's actions echoed the sentiment that while some world leaders used pressure, India used progress. His calm defiance, his vision for global collaboration, and his respect for both Indian and American innovation created a bridge between two great nations. He didn't confront Trump, he outshined him simply by showing what India contributes to the world every single day. And in doing so, Sundar Pichai became more than a CEO. He became a symbol of India's global intellect, a representative of the idea that in this new world, influence is earned not through power, but through purpose. In the ever-shifting chessboard of global politics, where superpowers compete for dominance and smaller nations often get caught in the crossfire, India has emerged as the most unpredictable yet steady force, a nation that plays not as a pawn, but as a player shaping its own destiny. Trump's attempt to corner India unintentionally illuminated this truth. For decades, India was viewed as a regional power, strong in potential but cautious in action. However, under a new vision of leadership and a confident diplomatic strategy, that perception began to change. The world started to recognize that India was no longer content to merely participate in global politics. It was now defining it. This transformation didn't happen overnight. It was the result of years of consistent policy, strong leadership, and a willingness to stand firm, even when the pressure was immense. When global powers like the US and China tried to pull India into their respective spheres of influence, India chose an independent path, one that prioritized national interest over global expectation. This philosophy, known as a multi-alignment, became the cornerstone of India's foreign policy. Instead of aligning with one bloc or ideology, India maintained constructive relationships with multiple global powers, trading with the US, buying defense systems from Russia, building infrastructure with Japan, and strengthening ties with the Middle East. It was a balancing act that required courage, clarity, and confidence, and India mastered it. During Trump's administration, this independence was tested more than ever. The US wanted India to take a hard stance against China, particularly during the border tensions and the trade wars. While India strongly defended its sovereignty and national security, it refused to become a tool for another nation's agenda. His rise to one of the most influential positions in the world sent a symbolic message to every nation. India's strength lies not only in its land or army, but in its people, in their ability to dream, build, and lead globally. Together, Jaishankar and Pichai represented two pillars of India's identity: wisdom and innovation, tradition and transformation, diplomacy and digital leadership. Their calm and confident responses shattered stereotypes about India's place in the world. For decades, India had been seen as a rising nation. Now, it was clear that it had already risen. The global audience took notice. Analysts, diplomats, and media houses began to speak of India with a new tone, not as a secondary player, but as a balancing force in the world order. When Trump's assertive tactics failed to bend India, the message resonated far beyond Washington or New Delhi. It reached every corner of the planet where nations struggled to maintain their independence amid global power plays. Small and medium nations, often pressured by bigger economies, saw in India an example that it's possible to stand tall, speak calmly, and still command respect. India became a symbol of strategic dignity, showing that real power doesn't always roar. Sometimes it simply stands its ground and lets truth speak for itself. Through this episode, the world learned something fundamental. India's strength doesn't come from confrontation, but from consistency. It doesn't need to prove its importance. Its actions already do. Whether it's providing vaccines to nations during global crises, sending missions to Mars and the Moon, or becoming the heart of global technology, India proves its leadership every single day through results, not rhetoric. And this, perhaps, is what shocked the world most of all, that a nation once underestimated for its poverty and complexity was now setting the standards of global behavior. While Trump's rhetoric represented old-school power politics, India's reply represented a new kind of leadership, one rooted in respect, intellect, and humanity. Jaishankar's diplomacy and Pichai's innovation worked like two sides of the same coin, one shaping the nation's voice on the world stage, and the other shaping the world's vision of what India truly represents. Yet together, they didn't just defend India's honor, they redefined India's image for the 21st century. The message was unmistakable. India is not just participating in the global order, it is helping build it. And when nations around the world saw that calm defiance, that quiet confidence, they understood that the era of one-sided dominance was fading and the era of mutual respect had begun, led unmistakably by India. The world today looks at India through a completely new lens. What was once viewed as a developing nation struggling to find its voice has now become a confident, articulate power shaping the global conversation. This transformation didn't happen by chance. It came from a combination of vision, perseverance, and a deep understanding of what true leadership means in the 21st century. India's new global identity is not built on military might or economic muscle alone. It is built on values, intellect, and vision. It is an identity rooted in centuries of civilization, yet forward-looking in every sense. From the corridors of diplomacy to the boardrooms of Silicon Valley, from the speeches at the United Nations to the innovation labs in Bengaluru, the message is consistent. India is ready to lead, not follow. At the heart of this new identity is confidence, a calm, unshakable confidence that no longer seeks validation from the West. This is an India that negotiates from a position of equality, not subservience. When Indian representatives speak at global summits today, they do so as equals, partners in progress, not petitioners for recognition. Dr. S. Jaishankar's diplomacy has been instrumental in shaping this image. He has ensured that India's foreign policy reflects maturity, strength, and clarity. Under his guidance, India has moved away from the shadows of traditional alliances to become a bridge between the East and the West. Whether it's dealing with the United States, managing strategic ties with Russia, balancing relations with China, or leading initiatives in the global South, India now speaks with a voice that others listen to with respect. Meanwhile, figures like Sundar Pichai have become the embodiment of India's intellectual power. His leadership at Google, one of the world's largest and most influential technology companies, represents the triumph of Indian innovation on a global stage. It showcases how India's education, discipline, and creativity have not only transformed individual lives, but also reshaped industries and economies around the world. Together, these examples define India's new identity, a nation where diplomacy and technology, tradition and innovation, heritage and modernity coexist in perfect harmony. India no longer measures its success by how others perceive it, but by the impact it creates across every continent. Economically, India's rise is unstoppable. It has become one of the fastest-growing major economies in the world, attracting investments from global giants while building its own innovation ecosystem. Its advancements in renewable energy, digital infrastructure, and artificial intelligence are setting new benchmarks for sustainable growth. The world's biggest tech companies are not just investing in India, they are depending on it. Militarily, India has achieved strategic self-reliance. With a strong defense industry and one of the most disciplined armed forces on the planet, it ensures peace through preparedness. From border security to peacekeeping missions, India has proven that it stands not for expansionism, but for stability and cooperation. Culturally, India's influence is immeasurable. From yoga and Ayurveda to art, cinema, and spirituality, India's soft power has touched billions of hearts worldwide. Every Indian festival celebrated abroad, every Indian innovation recognized globally, and every Indian professional succeeding internationally contributes to the mosaic of India's modern identity. Politically, India is no longer a spectator at global forums. It is a decision maker. As a member of the G20, BRICS, and other global alliances. It consistently advocates for fairness, inclusivity, and shared prosperity. Its leadership in climate action, its humanitarian efforts during global crises, and its role as the pharmacy of the world during the pandemic have earned it not just admiration, but trust. And through all this, one message echoes louder than ever: that India's rise is not about domination, it's about inspiration. It's about showing that a nation rooted in democracy, diversity, and discipline can thrive without losing its soul. It's about proving that global leadership is not inherited, it's earned through integrity, resilience, and contribution. This is the new India, bold but compassionate, powerful yet peaceful, modern yet deeply connected to its ancient wisdom. It is an India that doesn't chase global validation anymore. The world itself now turns to India for vision, for stability, and for leadership. Ladies and gentlemen, as we look back at this powerful journey, from Trump's attempt to corner India to the calm yet commanding responses from Dr. S, Jaishankar and Sundar Pichai, we realize that this story was never just about politics or power. It was about something far deeper. It was about identity, dignity, and destiny. Trump's challenge was not just a test of policy, it was a test of posture. Would India bend or would it stand tall? And through its composed diplomacy and visionary leadership, India gave its answer. Loud and clear, it did not fight with anger. It replied with intelligence. It did not argue for attention. It earned respect through its wisdom, courage, and confidence. Dr. S. Jaishankar, with his razor-sharp diplomacy, reminded the world that India's foreign policy is not written in the offices of Washington or Beijing. It is written in the hearts of 1.4 billion proud citizens. His calm defiance became a new model for international relations, one that values dialogue over dominance, balance over bias, and respect over rivalry. Pichai, through his brilliance and humility, showed that India's rise was not confined to the corridors of politics. It was visible in the laboratories of innovation, in the power of knowledge, and in the success of every Indian mind shaping the digital future. His story became the soft echo of a loud truth. India's intellect is now the world's greatest resource. Together, their voices created a new rhythm for modern India, a rhythm of progress, purpose, and pride. They symbolized a nation that does not fear power, it creates it. They reflected an India that no longer waits for recognition, it commands it. And as the world watches this transformation, it sees not just an economic giant or a military force, it sees a moral power, a power rooted in the timeless values of peace, humanity, and cooperation. A power that believes in growth not by conquering others, but by uplifting all. This is the new India. An India that stands for equality in diplomacy, excellence in technology, and ethics in leadership. An India that leads by example, not by intimidation. An India that speaks softly, but whose words shape the future. Today, when nations seek guidance, when global challenges demand courage, the world looks to India. Not as a follower, but as a friend. Not as a subject of power, but as a source of wisdom. Because India's greatest strength was never in its wealth, nor in its weapons. It has always been in its values. Values that say the world is one family. Values that teach us to rise, not by pushing others down, but by lifting everyone together. And perhaps that is the most powerful message this story leaves behind. That in a world divided by politics, competition, and fear, there still exists a nation that leads with heart. A nation that reminds the world that leadership is not about commanding others, but about inspiring them. Ladies and gentlemen, Trump may have tried to corner India, but what he did instead was unveil India's true strength. Dr. Jaishankar's words and Sundar Pichai's vision did not just defend India, they defined it. They showed that modern India is not a rising power. It is already a global pillar of hope, innovation, and integrity. And as the sun rises over the 21st century, one truth stands taller than all others. No matter who tries to corner it, underestimate it, or challenge it, India will always rise. Because India's strength does not come from power, it comes from purpose. It does not come from pressure, it comes from principle. And it does not come from dominance, it comes from destiny. India, this is India. Confident, courageous, and unshakably proud. The world tried to corner it, but India turned the corner, and the world followed.